It again, racism is not an issue of the system. Racism is an issue of the heart. It's a spiritual issue. It doesn't matter how much legislation, how much re-education you give people, unless their spirit is changed, unless their heart is changed, that seed of racism, that spirit will still be there, and it will manifest itself in different ways. Before it manifested itself in people wearing sheets and hoods, now it's manifested itself in people wearing suits and dresses. First, I want to thank everybody that has subscribed, liked, commented. I appreciate everything that you've said. No matter what you've said, I appreciate the likes. Please share this with your friends. Make sure you smash the like button. Make sure you hit that share button. We're trying to make sure that everybody know that they're not victims, that they're empowered for greatness, that we can make a difference again in this nation. That we can stand up for biblical values, we can stand up for truth and push back against all the lies and everything that's false that's taking place in this land. So I appreciate that. And please, thank you for looking at my videos and participating and making our voice known. Happy New Year to everybody. I pray that everyone has a wonderful and blessed and prosperous new year. 2022 is going to be better than 2021. I know that, and I believe that. But unfortunately, we still have some of the old vestiges of 2019 and 2020 and 2021 trying to enter 2022. And I'm referring to the 1619 Project, or Nikole Hannah Jones. So she recently did an interview with the AP where she spoke the truth. Well, she said that her 1619 Project was agenda driven.
How are you feeling about 2021, the highs and the lows?
2021 in some ways encapsulates what my life has become over the last few years, where I've gone from being, just a journalist to becoming some sort of symbol for people who either love me and my work or revile me and my work.
Overall, are you satisfied with the 1619 Project since its launch? Just overall, not just the book, but in general.
Absolutely. I'm proud of what we've done. It's exceeded all of my expectations. The disappointment, of course, has been that outside of that debate, that we've seen a backlash that's not just saying we don't agree with this, but efforts to really legislate against the project, to prohibit the project from being taught in schools.
If anything, did this year teach you about where we are in our country currently when it comes to racial justice and our reckoning with history?
This year, to me, is just reflective of what I've always understood about this country. And that is that steps forward, steps towards racial progress are always met with an intensive backlash, that we are a society that willfully does not want to deal with the anti-Blackness that is at the core of so many of our institutions and really our society itself. And we're seeing a backlash. We're seeing efforts to subvert democracy, to make it harder for Black people in particular, but people of color, marginalized people in general, to vote, to protest.
Thinking towards next year as well, do you think this country is poised to make any progress on issues of racial justice and especially around education?
What I'll say is what was underplayed was that there's a difference between a classroom teacher who maybe didn't do a great job of a lesson on race and the state legislature seeking to ban entire ideas, or people who are threatening school board members, which we saw the anti-critical race theory crowd threatening school board members, or school boards banning books or threatening to burn books or saying we aren't going to allow you to teach these ideas.
Do you believe we're at a point where our democracy could be in peril?
What we are seeing is what we saw after the period of Reconstruction in some ways. It's not exactly the same, of course, but this slow rollback of the rights of Black voters, of working class voters, of voters of color, with laws that are making it more difficult to vote, with hyper gerrymandering that ensures a white minority can maintain power no matter what a increasingly diverse majority is voting for. I think that we are in a very frightening time. Our democracy prior to 1965 was predicated on exclusion. It existed because Black people were excluded from democracy, and it was really a democracy for white people. We're seeing something very similar occurring now. So we haven't had a true democracy or resemblance of a democracy except for 55 years. And that we have seen the kind of tearing apart of those fibers of democracy once people of color in large number were able to have sway elections.
Some people would say that, this is all, an agenda-driven piece of work.
They'd be right.
Why are they right?
Because it is. The agenda is to force a reckoning with who we are as a country. The agenda is to take the story of Black Americans in slavery from being an asterisk to being marginal, to being central to how we understand our country. When people say that, though, I know that they're saying it in disparaging ways. I'm just being honest about the nature of this work. This is trying to help us better understand the country that we live in. And yes, that is absolutely an agenda.
And her agenda is to, quote unquote, expose systemic racism, to expose the history of America, if you will, and to shed light on that so that we can make progress. Well, that's not her agenda. I'm sorry. Her agenda is a Marxist, communist, socialist agenda to say that America was rotten at the core from its founding, and everything from the Constitution all the way down to the Bill of Rights needs to be scrapped, and everything needs to be redone because America is fundamentally racist. But I beg to differ, because she says racism is baked into every institution. Well, did she know that during Reconstruction, the first Black senators and representatives were elected? Did she ever know about Hiram Revels? Did she know about him? Is that someone that she's familiar with? Or is she familiar with Blanche K. Bruce, who was elected to the Senate in 1874 by the Mississippi State Legislature? Did she know about Representative Benjamin Turner of Alabama, Robert DeLarge of South Carolina, Josiah Walls of Florida, Jefferson Long of Georgia, Joseph Rainey, and Robert B. Elliott of South Carolina? See, I say all this because the 1619 Project and other radical, leftist, progressive, Marxist, agenda-based philosophies want to gloss over this period. They want to say that there was never any inroads made by this nation to correct the original issue that it had with not living up to its ideals that were expressed in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. You have to understand something. A country is just as good as its people. A country is just as good as the moral fabric of its people. Racism is not an issue of a system. Racism is an issue of the heart. I'm going to say that again. Racism is not an issue of the system. Racism is an issue of the heart. It's a spiritual issue. It doesn't matter how much legislation, how much re-education you give people, unless their spirit is changed, unless their heart is changed, that seed of racism, that spirit will still be there, and it will manifest itself in different ways. Before it manifested itself in people wearing sheets and hoods, now it's manifested itself in people wearing suits and dresses. because the same people with that same spirit that they had back then during Reconstruction that led to, unfortunately, the gains made by black people being erased by Southern Democrats, that same spirit that led to slavery being enacted, that same spirit is here today, but now it's twisted, now it's changed, now it's in the form of socialism. Now it's in the form of, I know better than you do. Let me give you things. Let me tell you where your place is so you can live in that. It's the same thing, but it's twisted. It's mind slavery now that's happening. She know about the radical Republicans. Oh, she probably didn't. These were people during and after the American Civil War. They were a member of the Republican Party. Did you catch that? They were members of the Republican Party who were committed to the emancipation of the slaves, and look at this, later to equal treatment and enfranchisement of the freed blacks. Look at that closely. These were radical, and I'm not making this up. This is coming from Encyclopedia Britannica. See, all you gotta do if you really wanna have an argument and a debate with people, if they can still allow it to be shown in Google search, look it up, research it for yourself. Look at what I'm saying, find it for yourself. But look at this. They were radical Republicans. Wow, a radical Republican. Wow, I thought all Republicans were racist. I thought Republicans were founded on racism. There's nothing but white supremacists in the Republican Party. Oh, they were radical Republicans. I didn't hear about any radical Democrats that were pushing for the emancipation of the slaves and equal treatment and enfranchisement of free blacks. All this stuff people are talking about, disenfranchisement of voting rights. Don't you know that Southern Democrats were the ones that initiated that? Southern Democrats were the ones that initiated Jim Crow laws. Don't you know that? The black codes, things like that. And what's going on now in these states? This is not disenfranchised. Why is it that it's only black people that are not equipped, not smart enough, do not have enough agency to be able to vote? Why is that? Why do they think so much less of black people? And black people, we allow that to happen. That we are not smart enough, that we are so handicapped that we need all these things, that we can't do the same thing that somebody white can do. That is white supremacy. And did she know about the Freedmen's Bureau? Oh, she probably didn't know about that. That this was a U.S. Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. That's what it was called. Established by Congress. You see that? Established by Congress to provide practical aid to 4 million newly freed African Americans in their transition from slavery to freedom. And you can think of it, it probably was the first welfare agency. And unfortunately, that's probably why it didn't work. Because welfare set up by the government does not work. Government intrusion. Now, in this case, the government needed to do something because the government was the one that caused these people to be disenfranchised. But nevertheless, see, and that goes to show you, whenever the government gets involved, it undoubtedly leads to the disenfranchisement. It undoubtedly leads to corruption. It undoubtedly leads to failure. Undoubtedly leads to failure and corruption. And that breeds more government. Government gets involved, it produces failure and corruption, and what that does, it leads to more government. And that's why you can never let the government get involved. Even though the government needed to correct the wrongs that they had caused, they caused more wrongs. And that wrong built upon another wrong, and another wrong, and another wrong. Because no matter what government does, it is an individual, and it is a collective of individuals that have the right morals and guidance given to them by God that will truly lead to lasting change in a nation and in the world, not a government. Government intrusion never leads to freedom. I'll say that again. Government intrusion never leads to freedom. So I want to speak to Nikole Hannah Jones. Did she know about the Freedmen's Bureau? Did you know about the radical Republicans? Did you know about those? Or did you know, but you chose not to mention that in your project because your agenda is to paint America as systemically racist when we know that racism is a spiritual and a heart issue. because people during Reconstruction did not have their hearts right. And so therefore, when the first milquetoast, weak-kneed Republican, Rutherford B. Hayes, had a contested election in 1876 with Democrat Samuel Tilden, he negotiated the end of Reconstruction so that he could retain power. Because in his eyes, he was considered a conservative. In his eyes, he felt that government should not intrude upon the state's rights. And while in theory he was correct, this directly led to Jim Crow laws. This directly led to segregation, to that period. It did. It led to that. And so that's why we never put our trust in any politician. You put your trust in God, and you hope you had moral and righteous individuals who come together as a collective. See, that's why the church, ideally, it would have been like-minded believers that would have come together and helped to lead Reconstruction. But unfortunately, you didn't have that. And so the government intruded, and the government had to pull back. And when the government pulled back, that's when segregation really took hold. And that's when Southern Democrats, utilizing the power of fear, KKK and others, instituted that period of time. But I want to speak to Nikole Jones. Nikole Hannah Jones. I want to speak to you and say, did you know about these things? Did you know about the first black senators? Did you know about the first black representatives during Reconstruction? Did you know about the Freedmen's Bureau? Did you know about those things? Did you know about the radical Republicans? Because if you did and you chose to not disclose that, that exposes your agenda. And you said you had an agenda to begin with. An agenda to make black people feel as victims. But we are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. And I'll say that again. We are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. We come from a long lineage of people. First of all, as a Christian, you have a culture that's greater than any culture that exists on this earth. And in the natural, as a person of color, as a black person, you come from a long line of people that overcame many odds to excel and to thrive during the worst periods. So therefore, we reject the premise of the 1619 Project. I reject it. I am not a victim. You are not a victim. We are not victims. We are empowered for greatness. Thank you so much for liking your comments and subscribing to the channel. Please share this with your friends. Smash that like button. Smash the subscription bell. Share this with everybody you know. We're trying to make sure people understand that they're not victims, that they are empowered for greatness, and all this stuff that's out here that's telling them otherwise is false and will not benefit them in the end. So please, I appreciate that. Share that.